Go.
For my thesis topic, I do a comparative analysis of the Greco-Roman civilizations and the United States. There are a lot of similarities between the United States and these civilizations. The founding fathers had been inspired to take the structures of government that Greece and Rome provides with us. We adopted the Athenian version of democracy and the Roman version of the republic, and we added to them and modified these structures of government to fit our own after the American Revolution, because the Articles of Confederation had failed in their job to unify the country together, and there wasn't really any strong structure. So when the founders had ratified the Constitution, they implemented these structures of government because they reflected what they thought would fit best to keep the country unified and what would resemble the concepts of freedom, of liberty, and to appease the situation that occurred. But even after the Constitution was ratified, the new states did not like how it operated. There were several skirmishes, and there was even one case in the Whiskey Rebellion where George Washington had to go out and calm the rebellion and really instated that no, like, we're in it together, because early on the colonies and the new states resembled more of the Greek city-states in Greece, and they weren't really unified together, and they had communicated with each other, they traded, but they weren't unified as a nation, and that's something that I focus on. And early on in my paper, I focus on the similarities of Greece and the United States, and I do an analysis of Alexander the Great and George Washington. The reason I do this is because of the leadership roles that both of these men have and the responsibility that they have for unifying these people. Alexander had unified Greece in the Hellenistic age under this notion of the empire of the mind, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to take the best traits and the best aspects of these newly conquered nations, or these nations that wanted to be a part of Greece, and he wanted to take the best of them to make a well-rounded citizen. He wanted to respect the ethnicity that made them Greek. He wanted to respect these traditions and these cultures that other nations had, such as Egypt and Persia and India. When he came and conquered these civilizations, he didn't overrule them as a tyrant that was oppressive. He actually gave them a lot of liberty and freedom to do so under just his authority, as long as these men would pledge allegiance to Alexander. And we see that George Washington and Alexander have a lot of similarities in the regards to their military prowess. George Washington was really inspired by the leadership and the legacies of Alexander the Great, and he studied a lot of the battles and wars that Alexander was involved in, and he modeled his structure in training the Continental Congress with the same structures that were placed in by Alexander the Great. And even some of the battles that take place in the Revolutionary War are modeled off of the same that Alexander was involved in. And Alexander is one of the central figures throughout the entire paper and throughout the research, because he inspired great men such as Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and George Washington. And a lot of the philosophies that were taught and a lot of these ideas that were central during Alexander's time are still relevant today. The whole notion of taking the best of everyone and different cultures and ethnicities or religions and traditions is implemented today in the United States, but there is a significant difference between how the United States is trying to take from other cultures and ethnicities compared to Greece. Greece had this very strong identity and who they were as a people. Greeks knew what it meant to be a Greek, regardless of which city-state they resided in. You obviously see a unifying factor with the Greeks. When they weren't at war with each other, they were at war with the Persians, and they could all unite together to fight this common enemy because they had a commonality between each other. And today the United States doesn't really have a lot in common with each other. There's a lot of division, and currently the United States is struggling with the question of what it means to be an American. What does it take to become an American? And as the time goes on through the Hellenistic period, we make a transition from the Greeks to the Romans. And the Romans struggled too in their beginnings, and they dealt with the problems of the Carthaginians, but after they were defeated in the Punic Wars, nothing stood in their way, and they assimilated very well and took in other nations and whoever wanted to be a part of the Roman population, because it had strengthened them nationally, and they had taken a lot from the Greeks who came before them and modified it to their Roman culture and to their liking, and it really strengthened them. But the Romans ran into a problem similar with the Greeks, and that is the failed legacy. They failed to take care of what their previous generations have done, and right now the United States is failing to take care of what the previous generation has left us with. And we can see that in the United States, with younger generations really questioning if democracy, if liberty, if constitutional freedom that is granted to us works. There's a lot of discussion of socialism and communism taking place because they want the government, and they believe that the government is going to help them fulfill the promises that they made, that they're going to take care of us. And the Greeks and the Romans fell into this too, and they had granted special powers to rulers such as Julius Caesar, who was appointed dictator for life, and the Senate had done that, and they were responsible for that rise. And it's because of the senators failing to preserve what their parents and what their grandparents had given them. And we really start to see the deterioration of Rome happen after the Gracchi brothers come to the forefront of politics in Rome. After their assassination, the Roman Senate fell into two different types of loyalties, and it started to deteriorate within because the senators had felt threatened by the rhetoric that the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, had been promoting with the land distribution bills, and it had threatened their way of living. And after that, Rome continued to fall into civil wars with the rise of Sulla and Marius, and after that civil war had broken out, and they were ruled by Sulla, who declared himself a dictator. And when Julius Caesar comes to the forefront of Roman politics too, the senators feel threatened by their way of living and want to keep an eye on Julius Caesar. And he was really a controversial figure within that time. And I do a comparative analysis between that of Julius Caesar and Donald Trump because of the controversy that both of them had within the Senate and among their political peers, and the popularity that they had among their people. It is definitely a you either love him or you hate him relationship. But Donald Trump is not a tyrant in the sense that Julius Caesar was. Donald Trump does not take power through militaristic means. He had won the electoral vote and won by the rules in the presidency. But this is not my focus on the demise of the United States or the Roman Republic. I want to focus on the role that the senators have and the role that the people have. It's not the role that Donald Trump has in the executive office, and it's not the role that Julius Caesar has as dictator for 10 years. It's the roles among the senators and how they reacted. They took matters into their own hands. The senators had actually had greater responsibilities and duties under the authority of Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar didn't choose to eradicate the Senate entirely. What he did was he expanded it from 600 senators to 900 senators, and he had actually brought in a lot of prosperity, and he had strong senses of nationality, very similar to how Donald Trump has a strong sense of nationality and went off and campaigned, make America great again. And Julius Caesar was very similar. He wanted to bring Rome back to this former glory because he believed that the Senate and the Republic were failing the people, and he wants to elevate Rome back to this pinnacle of the world that he believed it once was. And the senators felt that he threatened it, even though they were the ones that had appointed him dictator for 10 years, and then he later declared himself dictator for life. The senators had taken matters into their own hands with the Gracchi brothers and taken matters into their own hands with Julius Caesar, but they didn't have any methods to reinstitute the structures of a republic. And after the assassination of Julius Caesar, Rome fell into another civil war, and it was the beginning of the Roman Empire. And the United States has experienced war before on its own turf as well. We've had a civil war, but there was a very significant difference. The structures of the Republic had already been depleted by the time Julius Caesar had died. Our structures are still in place, and we still have time to reverse the deterioration that has been caused in the United States. And Abraham Lincoln said during the Civil War that the United States would not fall due to any foreign force or exterior force. It would deteriorate within. And that's what we're seeing today in the United States. We're seeing it deteriorate in our morals, in our education, in our economy. Our national debt is just astounding and is continuing to climb. What's being promoted in schools, and that is a central focus in the research. What's being taught in schools is being regulated by those who are in a political authoritative position. Our traditions and our values are being discredited, and we're rewriting history because we don't like what our history says about us, so we have to pander to these specific groups. And the difference between what Rome did and the United States did in their forms of integration is they continued to spread the importance of tradition, of preserving this identity that made them Roman. And what Americans are currently doing is hiding away from this American tradition and what made us American, because it seems like it's anti-progressivism. And this is a huge problem within the United States, and we are failing to preserve the legacy that we were left. And legacy is one of the central themes throughout the paper. But for the great news is that the United States is not Greece and it is not Rome. There is still time to reverse the effects of what we have done. History is very beneficial to a society, especially for the United States, because there are so many societies and civilizations that have come before us that have followed this similar equation of becoming a huge superpower, but then they overextend their hand, and then they don't know how to deal with this land that they've acquired, these people that are assimilated into the society, and being able to take the legacy before us and continue to pass it on. And many Americans don't want to pass it on, and they would rather have trading it in for a sense of security or a promise from politicians that will take care of your every need. But this reality is not possible without sacrificing the liberties and the legacy of the founding fathers, of the legacy of Americans that came before us, and if they're willing to trade in their liberties and their freedoms for an ideology, then they'll do that. But if they want to preserve it, it is the job to the American people to preserve it. We're not Greece and Rome, we're the United States.